It is time for another team preview for the BCFC, and now we will talk with Jason Quinter, the new head coach of the Valley Huskers. Jason, thanks for joining us here in studio rather than on the scratchy old Skype.
That's right. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you making the trip in from Chilliwack. Lots of challenges for the Valley Huskers going into this season, and obviously a transitional year. What did you know of the program coming in and taking this job? You knew it was going to be a big one.
I did. I had the chance to see about 4 games in person last year and then watch several others online. So I knew what the strengths and weaknesses were of the team, and then had a chance to get to know some of the players and realized that it was going to be, it's not that there's no talent there, it's just there's not enough of it. And there wasn't enough depth last year because they went through the season with about 45 to 50 players. Where normally you'd want to carry 75, 80 players. So it's more, it's not a complete rebuild, but it's pretty good, pretty close to it.
Now, you've run a number of camps over the years. You bring in a bit of a recruiting network, and I think recruiting is the thing that needed to be addressed with this organization.
Right.
What spots do you need recruiting help with right away?
All of them. It really is a depth issue. When you finish a season with 45 players and 5 or 6 of those are hurt, you realize where depth comes into play as you go through a full season. I mean, you need to have guys all the way through. So there's in a position where we don't need depth, but in particular the lines. And that's where everything starts with football, so both offensive and defensive line.
Well, it's funny, I talk with people across the CJFL and the CIS, and they always point to line being a concern. Where are you going to draw depth in terms of linemen from, both on the offensive and defensive side? Have you got some paths within BC, and do you intend to go outside of BC?
Both. First and foremost, we need to retain the kids that are from the Valley. We can't let them get away to the other competing teams because that makes everybody else weak or everybody else strong. But mostly it really is even across the board. We need BC kids, but we also need kids from Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even Ontario if we can get them. So we've been looking at all places.
Your quarterback, Noah Faulkner, was the Rookie of the Year for your team, Player of the Year. Threw the ball 315 times, which usually means you don't have great run support, or you're behind in a lot of games and you're just throwing it up and trying to find some points. His touchdown interception ratio, a little low, 8 TDs to 10 interceptions. He was really throwing straight into the fire, wasn't he?
He was. As a freshman, to go in there, especially with the lack of line support that he had, because they didn't have enough players, made it difficult for Noah, and he did the best he could in a really tough situation. And you're right, it was because they were behind. It was because their starting running back got hurt in the first game. And it just kind of snowballed from there. So they didn't really have any choice but to air it out. And what that does is twofold. Obviously, you've got the problems on offense with Noah trying to make that adjustment, but then you're putting your defense on the field all the time. And they get tired and they get run down. And that's why they gave up so many points.
What does that do to a quarterback's confidence in terms of not being out there for snap after snap? Right. That's a positive thing. Right. But being thrown into those situations where you know you're down by 2, 3, 4 scores, and how do you develop bad habits in that situation?
Well, because you're under fire constantly, what happens is you start to lose your mechanics. Your footwork goes, your placement goes, the way you throw the ball changes. You start to throw off the back foot. Kind of call it the Jay Cutler syndrome, where if you watch Jay Cutler, he has this immense talent as a quarterback, but every interception he throws is the same thing. It's thrown off the back foot because he loses his mechanics and he gets nervous. And that's what happens when a quarterback gets hit constantly or is rushed constantly and doesn't feel like he's got that protection. He starts to lose the basics of what he does as a quarterback, and it changes the way he does things.
Faulkner is the only returning quarterback that you have. Where have you tapped into other places for talent to get some support behind him?
We've got a couple quarterbacks coming out locally from BC, and we've got one coming from Alberta, possibly a second coming from Alberta, and then one coming from Manitoba as well. So we'll have a good, healthy competition this year.
What about the receiving corps? I understand you've got one graduate in terms of Cody Vinish moving on. What have you got in terms of targets for him?
We're going to be pretty strong, actually, I think. Now, this is, again, going into spring camp. Things change between spring camp and real camp because not everybody who comes to spring is going to sign with the team, and then we'll pick up other players. So it's a fluid situation, but right now it looks pretty good on paper. We have Blake Draper coming back, and he is the strongest receiver we had last year. We also have Jesse Deering, and we've got depth behind that, but we've worked to bring other players in, some high school graduates, but also some kids that are coming over from other programs, maybe from CIS or from midget, and making that jump up to junior now.
Brendan Atkinson was your running back who was nicked early in the season. What is the status on him in terms of health, and what is the status in that position in terms of depth?
Much better depth-wise now. We've recruited several kids to come out, including a couple locally from Chilliwack and from Abbotsford. But the big thing with Brendan is we're going to move him over to defense. He didn't get a chance to show it last year, but he's an outstanding athlete. He's extremely strong, he's fast, and he's aggressive, and he loves to hit. So we'll be moving him either to outside linebacker or possibly strong safety.
You mentioned bringing players in from Chilliwack, bringing players in from the area. How essential is it for you to tap into a relationship with the Graham Grizzlies or WJ Mowat or those teams in that area? How often are you on the phone to coaches with those programs?
Talk to them on a consistent basis. Also talk to the assistant coaches, talk to parents as well. It's an interesting kind of setup because obviously G.W. Graham, the head coach, is the ex-coach of the Valley Huskers. So it's a unique situation. We've been able to remain friends and we still work together. They help out at my camps when they can. If they need help, I help them when I can. So it's kind of symbiotic. It's also with the midget group. So we've got the Chilliwack Giants. Then we've got areas from Langley where we're drawing from midget players as well. So it extends out. We've even gone back to working with Mission and Pitt Meadows, as well as Terry Fox, and I have good relationships with those coaches. But it's a fluid situation, like I said, because the other junior teams are trying to draw from those schools as well.
I would think in a perfect world it would be nice if Langley was on the other side of the bridge from you guys in terms of territory. What's available in terms of talent on that other side of the bridge that you can draw into the Valley? Because it's still a long trip.
It is, and what we do is we set up kids with a place to stay out in Chilliwack during the season so they're not trying to make that trip back and forth because it's tough. I've done it. The North Shore is a little bit tougher because they generally tend to go across to the island. I don't know why that is, but it just seems to work that way. But having last year, they didn't have any real connection to Mission or Pitt Meadows or the Tri-City areas, and we've been able to tap into those this year. And then drawing also from Burnaby and East Vancouver, we've got some kids coming out from there, as well as some kids from Langley and Delta. So we've been able to branch out, but it's a slow growth.
You lose two starting defensive backs on your defensive side of the ball to graduation. What does your defense look like this year?
It's getting better. We have a number of players coming in, including some midget players and some younger players coming out of high school. So there will be a growth process there, and we're going to ask them to grow up pretty quickly. But we have better numbers this year. And I think, like I said, with depth, that's where everything starts because we can stick in the guys, the returning veterans, to jump in there. And we've got 5, 6 returning veterans who are good football players that they were put in an impossible situation last year, and they did the best they could with it. But now we'll have depth behind them, so we'll have a healthy competition. And it'll be very similar to what the Seahawks do down the NFL, where they've got talent there, but they constantly bring in more talent to challenge. So you're constantly having a competition for that position that you're in.
One of the biggest challenges, I think, coming up for you is on September the 17th when the Winnipeg Rifles come to town. There will be a spotlight there on your program relatively early in the development of what you're doing now as a head coach and with your coaching staff. How are you going to be ready for that?
Well, first and foremost, we want to be ready for Okanagan. That's our first game, and you're playing the defending champions, and they're defending champions for a reason. And I'm friends with Ben McCullough, the new head coach, and we've worked together, and it's going to be a nice rivalry. And we have a lot of catching up to do to get to their level. And but you're right. I mean, from there, we've got a tough first 4 games. I mean, we've got Okanagan, we've got Langley again, and we've got in between that VI. So that's a tough schedule to start off with. And then you get to the Winnipeg game, and we don't know exactly what to expect because we haven't seen a lot of film of the Rifles yet. And they went through a major overhaul in the offseason themselves. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But there will be a lot of attention on it, and we want to turn it into an event. We really wanted to do this. This wasn't a thing where we were told we need to do this. We volunteered because we wanted to have the interconference game. It happens to fall on the same day that the Chilliwack Chiefs are opening their season. So we've got our game at 1 o'clock. We're going to do some entertainment stuff, including a concert and food in between, and then everybody's going to go to the Chilliwack Giant game that night.
Well, you've got a fantastic setup there in Chilliwack. I know
Right.
a number of years ago I did a game on radio with Simon Fraser
Right.
in Manitoba. It wasn't very close to that
Right.
game, actually. But in terms of a stadium and in terms of a facility, you've got some things to sell to potential recruits, don't you?
We have an excellent infrastructure, great stadium, great locker room facilities, meeting room facilities, beautiful turf field. And Chilliwack's a beautiful area. I don't know how familiar people are with it. It's the fastest growing city in BC. Sunshine most of the time. It's temperate in terms of the temperatures. It's pretty stable. We don't get a ton of snow. We don't get a ton of rain. It's a great place to be. And I think that people, once they come out there and they see Chilliwack and they experience Cultus Lake and Vedder River and everything else there is there, they start to realize this is a pretty nice place to be.
And for a town its size, it can be a pretty good sports town, too, can't
Very
it?
good sports team. And I think I said Chilliwack Giants. I meant Chilliwack Chiefs, the hockey team. They did very well this year. They had a great season. And then we need to get the Valley Huskers back to that level where we can be competitive and draw the same interest the Chilliwack Chiefs do.
Well, Jason, appreciate you coming all the way in to Vancouver to do this interview instead of doing it on the Skype. Thanks for taking the time, and I know you're going to have success up there. So
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Best of luck.
Yeah, thank you.